On September 7, 2025, the world witnessed an event that definitively marked the history of the war in Ukraine. Russia launched the largest air attack since the beginning of the invasion, an operation that broke all barriers and put at stake the very survival of the Ukrainian state. It was not just another bombing, it was a calculated act to send a clear message: no part of Ukraine is beyond the Kremlin's reach. More than 800 drones and missiles were fired in successive waves during 11 hours of terror. A saturation barrage designed to overwhelm Ukraine's air defenses, forcing Kyiv to spend extremely expensive interceptors against cheap drones, while more advanced missiles penetrated with deadly violence. Even with an impressive interception rate, dozens of projectiles broke through the shield and hit targets across the country. Houses, residential buildings, schools, and even the political heart of Ukraine, the cabinet of ministers, were struck. What this attack symbolizes goes beyond the battlefield. Russia openly decided to attack the core of the Ukrainian government, a symbolic, political and strategic gesture that rewrites the unwritten rules of war. If before there were tacit limits, such as avoiding direct strikes on centers of state power, those limits were violently destroyed. This event is not just a military episode. It is proof that Moscow is willing to escalate the conflict without precedent, even under global condemnation. An act of strategic communication that shows contempt for diplomacy and signals a new volatile phase where peace seems increasingly distant. And here I ask you, how far can this attack change the course of the war? Do you believe the West will respond accordingly, or will it continue repeating empty condemnations? Leave your comment, because your opinion can open the debate many want to avoid. The September 7th attack stood out not only for the chosen target, but also for its unprecedented scale and complexity. Several international sources classified it as the largest single air assault since the beginning of the invasion in 2022, surpassing all previous bombings. More than 800 aerial assets were launched, including Iranian-made Shahed drones and Iskander cruise and ballistic missiles. But the strategy was not in the simple volume. There was sophisticated military engineering at work. The Kremlin decided to mix low-cost weapons with high-precision projectiles. The objective was clear: to saturate, confuse, and penetrate the Western-supplied Ukrainian air defenses. The Shahed drones, many of them used as decoys, did not even carry explosive charges. Their role was to trigger radars, forcing Ukraine to fire interceptors that can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars each. Behind this swarm came the Iskander-K cruise missiles, flying at low altitude, and the feared Iskander-M ballistic missiles, capable of reaching very high speeds and unpredictable trajectories. Even under all this pressure, the Ukrainian air defense achieved impressive results: 747 drones and 4 missiles shot down. However, as with every saturation attack, the logic is mathematical. No matter how efficient the defense, there will always be projectiles that get through. In this case, about 65 hit between 33 and 37 different locations. This attack was not just aimed at destroying strategic targets. It had a second objective: to exhaust Ukraine's air defense reserves. While the West takes weeks or months to approve new aid packages, Moscow spends cheap drones to drain extremely costly interceptors. It is a war of resource economy where every shot carries political and military weight. At the end of the operation, the message was clear. Russia showed that it can sustain attrition for long periods, while Ukraine depends on the speed with which Washington, Berlin, or Paris release armaments. The most explosive point of the entire attack was not the number of drones nor the impacts on different regions, but the chosen target in Kyiv, the cabinet of ministers of Ukraine, the seat of the executive branch. This building had never been hit in more than 3.5 years of war. Until then, the Kremlin had avoided directly bombing the central government bloc, where the parliament and the presidential palace are also located. That restraint, even if tacit, collapsed in the early hours of September 7th. Images showed the roof in flames, with firefighters and helicopters struggling to contain the fire. Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko was photographed inside the building, amid the rubble, in a stance of defiance and resistance. Still, the strategic interpretation is inescapable. The political center of Ukraine is no longer safe. Curiously, there is ambiguity about the direct cause of the damage. Some officials suggested the fire may have been caused by debris from a downed drone, not by a direct impact. However, from a military and psychological point of view, this doubt is irrelevant. Whether by direct hit or fragments, the symbolic effect is devastating. The Kremlin chose to strike, or at least allow to be struck, a target that has no immediate military value. It was not a munitions depot, nor an underground command center. It was the building that represents the administrative sovereignty of Ukraine. That transforms the attack into a political message, and this message came at a calculated moment. Just days earlier, a coalition of volunteers formed by 26 countries had promised Ukraine security guarantees for the post-war period. At the same time, Washington was trying to mediate peace talks. Moscow's message was direct. We do not recognize these initiatives, we do not accept the terms, and we will not respect supposed security guarantees. For Russia, hitting the cabinet of ministers was a way of telling the West, you cannot even protect the heart of the government you support. While images of the cabinet of ministers in flames dominated the headlines, the real impact of the attack spread through the streets of Kyiv and dozens of other Ukrainian cities. The bombing was not limited to the symbol of political power. It was designed to hit Ukrainian society itself. Reports confirmed between 3 and 5 dead across the country, including the most shocking tragedy, the death of a mother and her baby in Kyiv, buried under the rubble of a residential building. In other districts, apartment blocks of 9 and even 16 stories partially collapsed, leaving dozens of families homeless. Footballer Georgy Sudakov completely lost his house, where his pregnant wife, young daughter and mother were, all survived by miracle. The attack also left marks in Zaporizhzhia, Kryvyi Rih, Kremenchuk, and even Odessa. Schools, warehouses, kindergartens, and urban infrastructure were damaged. In some locations, fires consumed entire buildings. The Ukrainian population once again felt that no place is safe, neither shelters nor residential neighborhoods. This repeated pattern reinforces Russia's objective of using air war as a psychological weapon, spreading fear, eroding morale, and turning every citizen into a potential target. The war is no longer about front lines, it is now about the daily lives of millions of people. But what about you? Do you think this kind of terror can really weaken Ukrainian resistance, or will it produce the opposite effect, uniting the people even more against Moscow? Leave your view, because this is the debate that shapes the course of the war. The international response to the attack did not take long. Within hours, European leaders and global institutions issued strong and unified condemnation. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen accused Moscow of mocking diplomacy, while British Prime Minister Keir Starmer called the attack cowardly and proof that Putin does not take peace seriously. In France, the Foreign Ministry described the bombing as a new escalation and reinforced that it sees no sign of Russian willingness for serious negotiations. At the UN, Antonio Guterres denounced the open violation of international humanitarian law, demanding that the attack stop immediately. Similar statements came from Portugal, Poland, Canada, and other allies of Kyiv, consolidating the image of a united diplomatic front. But unification in discourse does not resolve the practical contradiction. Zelensky and his Prime Minister, Yulia Sviridenko, were direct. We don't just need words, we need actions. Kyiv again demanded more advanced air defense systems, expanded sanctions against Russia's energy sector, and even long-range weaponry. The question is whether the West is willing to provide all this without fear of provoking an even greater escalation. On the Russian side, the official response followed a familiar script: initial silence, then a statement claiming that only military-industrial targets were hit. No mention of the Cabinet of Ministers in an attempt to deny the obvious. This counter-narrative is part of the information war that accompanies every missile launched. Beyond the immediate destruction, the September 7th attack must be read as a calculated act of strategic communication. The chosen moment was not random. Days after the creation of the coalition of volunteers, and amid diplomatic efforts sponsored by the United States, Moscow decided to respond not with words, but with fire. It was a violent veto of diplomacy, a way of making clear that Russia does not accept negotiations under the current terms. The target in Kyiv represented Russia's attempt to re-establish the so-called dominance of escalation. By breaking tacit limits and striking the administrative heart of Ukraine, the Kremlin signaled that it still controls the pace of the war and can always go further. The implicit message is dangerous. If the West supplies more advanced weapons, Moscow may respond in an even more unpredictable way. Ukraine responded almost immediately, attacking the Druzhba pipeline in Russia's Bryansk region, one of the most important channels for oil exports to Europe. This retaliation inaugurates a cycle of eye-for-eye strikes against critical infrastructure, increasing the risk of the war, exceeding the traditional limits of the battlefield. Russia's strategy seems to be evolving from conquering territory to something darker, delegitimizing and paralyzing the Ukrainian state. By combining terror against civilians, strikes on symbols of power, and pressure on the economy, Moscow may be trying to turn Ukraine into an ungovernable, isolated, and dependent country. The massive air attack of September 7th was not just another escalation of the war, it was a strategic rupture. By striking the political center of Kyiv and spreading destruction across the country, Moscow showed it is willing to rewrite the rules of the conflict, eliminating any notion of tacit limits. The war has entered a darker phase, where national symbols, critical infrastructure, and even the perception of everyday safety have become targets. The West, despite its harsh rhetoric, still faces its central dilemma. How far is it willing to go? Diplomatic condemnations and new sanctions are important, but they do not stop drones and missiles from crossing Ukraine's skies. What Kyiv is asking for is clear: more air defense systems, more ammunition, more counterattack capability. The question is whether the Allies will deliver or remain trapped by fear of escalation. For the Kremlin, the attack was a gamble, to show strength, intimidate the enemy, and test the limits of the Western response. For Ukraine, it was a painful proof that its survival depends not only on its resilience, but on the real determination of its international partners. The future of this war now walks a fine line between containment and catastrophe. And I ask you, did this attack redefine the course of the conflict once and for all? Did Russia manage to impose its narrative, or did it only strengthen Ukrainian and Western determination? Leave your opinion in the comments, because this debate goes far beyond the war. It speaks about the future of the world order.